Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good, good. You know, I'm feeling kind of dull and inarticulate because I just got back from vacation. And there are people who say that vacations leave them feeling refreshed and ready to go, but it's never worked that way for me.
I don't know. I didn't have a vacation, and I even whined about it on my blog today, uncharacteristically.
Yeah, very.
And we'll see if whining works.
It's worked for me.
I think it's a big hit generator. But I do find that they refresh me, but what the hell?
They do? Really?
But I don't have a family, you know, so...
Also, maybe you don't work throughout your vacation. Maybe if I didn't work, it would be a more vacation-like experience, possibly.
That's possible, yes.
Okay.
But
I'll try that.
Anyway,
So,
have you ever been refreshed? And
that's kind of a
and,
personal question, don't you think?
Well, our viewers want to know.
In my youth, a couple of times,
Okay.
I just kind of went crazy and got refreshed, yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to say anything more about that.
Yeah, I don't think you should.
Okay. So as a result of my vacation, we last spoke on August 21st. And just to pick up one thread on that conversation, it turns out that on August 22nd, Iran did not do anything rash, contrary to the suggestion by Bernard Lewis that it might even attack America or Israel, because August 22nd was some kind of apocalyptically significant day in Islam, in his view.
The fact that nothing happens tends to reinforce Fareed Zakaria's argument that Ahmadinejad is basically just blowing hot air rhetoric to cement his position within the Iranian hierarchy.
Yeah, Fareed, that was a good column, and he was trying to debunk this school of neocon thought that sees the Iranian regime as in the grips of an apocalyptic fervor, and therefore is something that should be destroyed as soon as possible. And in this particular case, that paradigm did not work out. And by the way, Bill Kristol had at least suggested that on August 22nd, Iran might at least test fire a missile or something, make some kind of trouble. So he was wrong too. So that model has zero predictive power so far.
Their obvious fallback is that Israel's vigorous preemptive action against Hezbollah put Iran on the defensive and scuttled their plans.
I'm not sure how obvious that is, but if that's what they're saying, my hands off to their creative power.
I'm just making this up. I have seen nobody actually say that.
Well, they should.
But it's not.
I think it would sound good coming from them.
It's not completely crazy. I mean,
no, nothing they say is completely crazy. That's why they haven't been institutionalized yet. That's why they're so dangerous.
Fareed's column was very persuasive until the very end, when he said they're 5 or 10 years off from having a nuclear weapon, so there's nothing to worry about. What do we do?
What do you doubt? The 5 to 10 years? Or
No. What do we do in 5 to 10 years? If they have a nuclear weapon, there's a whole lot to worry about, because it's not at all clear that they're deterrable the way an ordinary
I think the argument
deterrable.
would be, first of all, 5 years is enough time to actually exert some influence on the behavior of regime, and secondly, that the things Bush is doing tend to have the opposite of the desired effect and tend to be radicalizing them. So, you know,
that's different.
The idea would be change course, and maybe there won't be so much to worry about. The point is, you can treat them as essentially rational actors. That's the point of Fareed's column.
The point of Fareed's column was to whistle past the graveyard and said if we treat them as rational actors, we have a good chance of not having them explode a nuclear weapon in our vicinity or the vicinity of one of our allies. And I maintain that is not a counsel of optimism.
No, but I'm not. No, I don't think he's just saying that. Hey, maybe it'll be less radical people who have the nukes. I think it's also possible, if it's 5 to 10 years away, that there might be no nukes, because you might eventually be able to cut a deal with them that precluded the drive for a nuclear weapon.
Well,
that's certainly a possibility that's out there.
That'd be great, but I didn't see him dangling that possibility really strongly.
Well, that's why we're here, to fill in the blanks.
Okay, well, thank you.
No problem.
It's a service you perform.
So anyway, where do we go from there? I mean, there's one more thing, actually, I wanted to say about the whole Clash of Civilizations business. I mean, as you know, it seems to me kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there was a good article in the Washington Post today about Muslims in America, and those of them who are inclined toward Wahhabism or Salafism, two very closely related things, both of them fundamentalist versions of Islam. And 2 different professors were quoted making points I like to see made. One is a guy at George Mason who says Salafi teachings begin to be, that is fundamentalist teachings, begin to be more attractive to more Muslims as a defensive response in the face of this new global war on Islam, the thing that the phrase virtually taken out of Bush's mouth. They are saying we will hold fast and emphasize anew the fundamental tenets of our faith. There's another professor from Georgetown says when moderate Muslim groups that promote integration feel they are under scrutiny or discredited by the government, Muslims turn societally inward, and that turning inward gives Salafism more influence because Salafis aren't saying we need to integrate.
A couple of points. Congratulations on getting an assistant professor to spout your views to a...
I'm the one pulling the strings, Mickey.
A reporter. I mean, that counts for very, very little in my book. Assistant professors could be found to say virtually anything. The main point of the article was that Salafism has decreased radically since 9/11 because people who are adherents to that extreme version of Islam feel under attack. So the attacks have worked to reduce it. Now, I'm sure there are also these counterproductive effects, but you're flying in the teeth of the general thrust of that argument, which is that there used to be a whole bunch of these people around, and now there's 6%.
Well, yeah, but the waning of support happened just as a result of 9/11, according to that article.
Well, because it
wasn't as a result of some Bush policy. I mean, actually, there was a little hardball played by the Bush administration that seems to have been effective, according to that article, which is, I don't know, somehow they encourage... I mean, the Saudis were directly subsidizing.
Yeah, the Saudis withdrew their support, and people looked at them funny on the street, and they probably looked at themselves and said, do we really support this? And there was a certain amount of questioning going on.
Right, but that was the result of 9/11.
Those were all good things.
That was the result of 9/11 itself.
Well, but the people looking at them funny on the street is one of the things that you lament.
Well, I say that with things like ethnic profiling, we should take into account exactly the dynamic that the second of those professors described.
But the problem is you have a double standard, I think, Bob, because when something happens that you don't like, you say, well, we should stop it because
I don't like it.
It will anger and Muslims and make them feel victimized. But then other things you say we should stop it because it will give them a feeling of victory. Well, why wouldn't they take it as a victory if they stopped ethnic profiling?
They haven't started it yet, Mickey. That's why.
Well, right, but sure, but why wouldn't
it wouldn't be stopping it?
You think Osama bin Laden is so stupid that he can't say, hey, I've stopped something from happening?
I think Osama bin Laden is so smart that he loves the idea of Muslims being singled out of airport lines on the basis of their religion because he knows that will feed the fire.
And if we did it and then we stopped it, you don't think he would say, well, this is just like banning liquids from airplanes, another victory for terrorism.
Mickey, I'm not advocating doing it and then stopping it. I'm advocating giving this careful thought before we march penguin style toward it.
You're fighting the hypothetical. I'm saying that in this short-term period where you say there's no threat of terrorism, you have a very convenient definition of what is counterproductive and what will enrage people, and the things you don't like, you say that it will enrage them, and you ignore the possible counter effects to that, which is if you indulge people's victimization, it only encourages them, and that they might claim it as a victory in exactly the same way you claim that they will claim the banning of the unnecessary banning of liquids from flights as a victory.
First of all, I didn't say this is a time when there's no threat of terrorism. Secondly,
you said
if we do what I say, Mickey, and you can find the Al-Qaeda recruiting video that has on it, the Americans didn't implement ethnic profiling, I will surrender and say you were right. The chances of that happening are nil.
You can't find one that says that they profile either. And surely
no, because I'm not talking about its propaganda value in that sense. I'm talking about American Muslims who actually witness it and are subject to it up close and personal, feeling more and more alienated from society.
But, well, it seems to me that compared, a sensible thing like profiling, which has huge preventive effects and might have some secondary isolating effects, is a second order problem compared with first order.
You just made up those coefficients, Mickey. You just invented them. You said your side of the argument would have powerful effects, and my side is negligible. Okay, well then you win if you're right that's how they're quantified, Mickey.
Well,
you're
good.
right.
And if I'm right, I win.
If you're right, but you can't just kind of posit it as if any normal, rational person would
I'm
accept
saying
it.
that's what I think. I think it seems to me if you're talking about enraging Muslims, Bush's speeches the ones he gave today, the one he gave today and the one he gave last week, have an effect that's about 1,000 times greater than ethnic profiling. He, as you said, he responded to the failure of Ahmadinejad to do anything on August 22nd by proclaiming that there is a clash of civilizations in effect. He said it was the decisive ideological struggle of the 21st century. How does he know that? The century's pretty young. And basically he did... You read the speech, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be from the press accounts.
Okay, wait. Before we're segueing into Bush, I guess.
Yes.
First of all, I want to clarify my official position on ethnic profiling so far. I don't claim to know what those coefficients are. What I've said is just it should be part of the discussion. We should take into account the counterproductive side, and almost no one is taking that into account. That's just for clarification.
You say that sometimes, but you've also just opposed it in the past, too.
I'm not sure you can...
We'll go to the videotape.
Go to the videotape, find the link, and if you're right, you're right. If you've indeed baited me into being insufficiently ambiguous and vague.
And
but anyway,
Coulter said it must be wrong.
What?
And Coulter's for profiling, it must be wrong. Isn't that your official position?
That's pretty much, that's pretty ironclad logic right there, I would say. So we're segueing into Bush.
We're segueing into Bush because, it's... And I'm agreeing with you that I'm sure you'll agree that the speech was bad. It's not as bad when you read it as it was in the press. When you read it, it basically comes off as sort of a standard attempt to appeal to the World War II patriotism of American Legion people. But there is this sort of apocalyptic, hyperbolic gloss that he put on it about how this is the long twilight struggle, this is the most important thing in the world. And he does several things. He not only builds up Islamic radicals into, much bigger than they really are, but he unites them. He says there's no difference between Sunnis and Shiites. They're all part of this horrible conspiracy. They all hate us. And that's just sort of like a fundamental, that's a politics 101 mistake. You don't attack somebody who's has lower strength than you and build them up. And I just think that's much worse than profiling. In terms of people around the world saying, hey, maybe this guy is against us, and also thinking, well, gee, the main anti-American side is Al-Qaeda, so if we want to be anti-American, we better side with Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's idiotic in terms of global terms.
Seems to me, I mean, it's funny, to the extent that this is an election game plan, it has something in common with the game plan of the radicals themselves, the terrorists themselves. I mean, what they do is, first of all, they exacerbate world tensions, tensions between Muslims and various people. And then they they feed on that politically to expand their base or to appeal to their base. Now, Bush, I don't think, set out to do that intentionally. He didn't invade Iraq in order to exacerbate the situation and then exploit it politically. But now that he's done that, and in various other ways, I think, been in some ways a party to the exacerbation of the conflict. He is trying to exploit it politically, and so it does,
But they seem, a couple points, they seem to really believe it. This seems to be the product of a guy at the White House named Pete Wehner, who used to work for Bill Bennett, and he's been the major defender of the Iraq policy, and he's a true believer. So he would probably seize on any opportunity to do this, whether or not it was, politically expedient. And the second is, I don't think it's going to work. It depends on it being a low turnout election, and they only energize the base more than they scare the living daylights out of the people in the middle. And it seems to me that latter effect is probably going to outweigh the former effect.
Yeah, I would like to think it won't be effective. On the other hand, the Democrats haven't really figured out a response to it. I mean, this morning, Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias, in posts that, so far as I can tell, showed up on the web within moments of each other, basically made the same point, which is that, the standard Democratic response to Bush saying things like this is to say, well, you're politicizing terror, which is basically a form of whining, and it sounds as if they're afraid to actually engage the issue and go further and say, no, terror is serious. It's political. Fine. You're just screwing up the war on terror. We have a better approach. And so, to the extent that the Democrats don't yet seem to feel comfortable really addressing what Bush is saying, I'm not totally convinced it's a political mistake for him to say it. In any event, I wish they'd figure out a way to address it.
But then he should be campaigning, pointing out the weakness of the Democrats and pointing out how horrible it'll be if the Democrats are in power, not reminding voters about how horrible it is to have him in power.
He's kind of trying to do that. He's saying if the Democrats are in power, they'll withdraw from Iraq. I mean, but it's a double-edged sword because they would have been less likely to get us into Iraq. So his bringing up the subject of Iraq has this double...
Saying they want to, the Democrats will withdraw from Iraq, and that's a bad thing, is one thing. But blowing it up into this apocalyptic confrontation of the next century is the part that's so scary.
Well, it's definitely irresponsible, I think, because of the effects it will have geopolitically. And I agree with you that it's not clear that it's smart politics.
I mean, I thought Bruce Reed's blog on Bush's tech was the key, which is Bush sort of has two alternatives. What he should really do is get out of the way and let the candidates run on local issues. If he really wants Republicans to win, he should get out of the way, let the candidates run on local issues, including running against him on immigration, and not seize the stage by blabbering about the global war on terror. But this was sort of might be a second best solution, which is he has to say something. So he says like a familiar anodyne thing that's going to have some base mobilizing effects, and then he'll retreat into the background and let people run their own races. So this is sort of hiding in plain sight for him. I don't know if that's the way Bruce makes sense of it, and he says it's not going to work. But
I mean, I don't know who would be the one to break it to the president that these candidates are better off the farther away you are from them. But that might make sense. And
Bruce said he knew that for months. He's stayed out of their races and just raised money for them.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I mean, there's also these issues of immigration. I mean, they've chosen to kind of just basically not make that an issue. That became official yesterday, right?
Well, the Republicans haven't pushed immigration.
Well, they've chosen not to do a bill on immigration.
One thing I just realized is that Bush might be better off in some ways with the Democrats in control of the House because they'll pass his immigration bill. The Senate's already gone along. All he needs is the House. So if Nancy Pelosi is there, he's got a much better chance of getting what he wants and burnishing his legacy. So it's not clear that I just want to raise the issue that maybe he doesn't really care that much about retaining the House. But there was no way they were going to pass what Bush wants, which is this semi-amnesty, giving a path to citizenship for everybody who's now here illegally. They could, however, it seems to me, have passed some sort of lowest common denominator, mainly for show, but also maybe with some substance. Border enforcement bill, build a few miles of fence, have some employer sanctions, maybe have some vague commitment to consider a path to citizenship in the future so it doesn't enrage Latinos. And why didn't they pass that sort of minimal thing that would have helped people and given conservatives something to run on? That's what I don't quite understand.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the downside for the Republicans of not doing anything is that now the Democrats can say, look, we have this immigration problem, and these guys have had control of Congress and the presidency, and they haven't done anything. Whereas if they passed anything at all, then Democrats would have to some extent, take a stand if they were going to criticize them, and nobody wants to take a stand on this issue in either party.
Well, that's right. It would have forced, suppose they passed just a bill saying we're going to build, 200 miles of fence, okay? The Democrats, are they going to vote against that? That's a killer for them if they do that.
Right.
And they would have had to show their true colors and say, we don't believe in enforcement. We also believe in providing a path to citizenship, and then they would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
I think it was stupid, and I think in this sense, Bush and the moderates in the Senate, like McCain and Lindsey Graham, don't care that much about who wins the House. They care more about immigration. Their version of immigration reform.
But it is a coherent plan. I mean, it's A, don't alienate any of your base. That's why they don't want to touch, Republicans don't want to touch immigration. B, rally your base. That's what the global Manichaean war on terror is, and we'll see. I mean, it kind of worked last time. It's the reason Bush is still president, right?
Well, right, but they can't be that stupid as to think it'll work a third time. I think they must. I don't know what they're thinking, but it seems to me immigration from the right has a much better base mobilizing impact than hitting hard on the global war on terror again.
Could be. And do you think Democrats can get any mileage on this, on the economic issue? You know, real wage, not just stagnation, but the actual, I guess, dropping of real wages.
Well, there are two issues. There are three issues really: stagnation of wages, inequality, which could happen if wages were going up, if the rich were getting so much richer than the middle class, and poverty. I think poverty is sort of a non-issue electorally. It obviously should be an issue substantively. Stagnation, of course it's an issue. It's especially an issue in the Midwest where trade is killing all sorts of unskilled, well-paid jobs. That's the effect of trade. Kevin Drum had a piece saying we should only care about inequality to the extent it benefits the middle class. And I read that, and it's not just because I disagree with everything Kevin Drum writes. I sort of said, well, why? Why is it the talisman of, why should, I understand electorally it's important that everybody feel they're advancing, but why do we really care in society that the middle class keeps getting richer and richer? Don't we have a pretty good life, and isn't society as a whole advancing, and isn't it pretty materialistic to say we have to have a 2% raise every year, as opposed to values like social equality, which are sort of color the society however rich or poor you are.
And which you discussed extensively with Dan Dresner a week ago.
Yeah.
And you also discussed the whole academic debate about what causes, to what extent are actual politicians in power responsible for what's happening with wages. But at a political level, that last thing, in other words, what's really causing it, does not necessarily matter a whole lot, right? I mean, when there's economic malaise, the incumbents lose, right?
Right, but I think it's way too strong to say there's economic malaise nationwide. The press is wildly concerned about it because the press really more or less wants Bush out of there for both story changing and ideological reasons. The consumption data are never as bad as the income data. So if you look at actually what people are spending, they're always actually richer than all these stories about the recent census would lead you to believe. A lot of the stories on wage stagnation are based on a figure from the Department of Labor called the average wage for non-supervisory workers. That is a very troubled indicator. It probably understates how well people are doing. And the third thing is, it seems to just take a long time for a boom economy to translate into actual economic gains for the vast majority of people. I remember sitting in a coffee shop, a few years into the Clinton boom, and lamenting that the Clinton boom had yet to show up in increased wages for average Americans. Well, the next 3 years were terrific. It finally did, after a lag. And it seems to me Bush has a reasonable argument that people sort of intuitively understand that eventually, if the economy keeps growing, they will benefit.
Well, I don't know. It seems to be asking a lot for a lot of patience. Can Democrats raise the question of tax policy? I mean, it seems to me one form of influence that politicians clearly do have over the distribution of income is tax policy. And Bush passed a tax cut that was disproportionately in favor of wealthy people. So why can't Democrats just point that out and say, look, he gave a dinky tax cut to working people, a huge one to rich people, and that's one reason we don't have enough money to do things you'd like to see done, like provide health insurance, either subsidize it or actually provide it. So what we would do is roll back the tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. Maybe they're already saying that, I don't know, but it seems to me a logical, defensible way to exploit the issue politically.
I agree, and I think that is their implicit platform, and I think it should be their implicit platform. We're going to tax the rich to bring you national health care. That would be my platform if I were them.
Amen.
But
so we agree.
Yeah, but on the other hand, they should thank, but my perverse anti-Democrat spin is they should thank Bush for cutting the taxes so they're there to raise. If if Bush hadn't cut the tax, all the money would have been pissed away on veterans programs and farm subsidies, and it wouldn't be there for national health care.
Well, it depends on to what extent you think spending is actually constrained by the amount of money that's available. So far as I can tell, nobody in Washington feels any constraint at all. I mean, these deficits have just become astronomical.
Well, but you can't run that experiment, because who knows how wild they would have gone if there'd been, hadn't been the tax cuts starving them of however umpteen $1 billion of revenue.
Could be wilder, yeah.
Yeah, so you can always spend more. But anyway, I think this latest Bush tack, it's a little like, when you break up with your girlfriend, there's a point where you have these fights, and instead of taking a step back and saying maybe you're right, you exacerbate them, you push them to the limits just to see where the limits are.
Wait a second, it's been a really long time since I've broken up with a girlfriend.
Okay, well,
can you run that by me again?
Breaking up with anybody,
I haven't broken up with anybody in a long time. But
okay.
I mean, except you, like every 2 weeks or so. But
yeah, but there's this point every day. There's this point where instead you want to you sort of provoke the person instead of stopping the bullheaded behavior that really annoys the other party. You sort of push it to its limits just because you want to make. It's sort of a way of satisfying your curiosity that this really is what's pissing them off.
What you do, what you know they hate in you.
Yeah, but maybe they've just been vaguely dissatisfied, and you don't know why they're dissatisfied, but maybe it's because,
Mickey, this explains a lot, first of all. Let me just pause
I just think it's
a
natural human sort of behavior.
No, I think this is the source of cowsism, Mickey.
And it's what happens right before you break up with somebody, and Bush is about to break up with the American people, and he's heightening the contradictions to their breaking point by revving up the scary rhetoric about the apocalyptic war and terror when he should be doing other things.
So he's addicted to being hated or something. He loves being hated.
No, he's just being bullheaded in the way people are bullheaded.
He's just messing with our head. He's just a crazy frat boy.
That might work as a net to throw over. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think bullheaded and is
the man is bullheaded, and you're right. You're right that the way he responds to negative feedback, I think instinctively, is to ratchet up the behavior that. That's true. He fundamentally has a don't back down personality. And that may be what leads to the actual apocalypse. But?
No. I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah, well, I think so. And speaking of apocalypse, we're going to talk a little about Iraq just because we haven't done it so long. I mean, we got kind of distracted by Lebanon while that was a hot war. And it's funny, this report... Well, first of all, okay... We've captured this guy who's like number 2 or something in Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but I think the horse is kind of out of the barn there. Al-Qaeda in Iraq did succeed in starting this sectarian war. The other thing is, in this report that the Pentagon had issued a few days before they did this, the Pentagon itself said that the death of al-Zarqawi himself, the former head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, had little effect because of the group's cellular structure. Yeah. So I've got to think that arresting a guy who's not even the leader of it is not going to be...
But I'm always recommending Iraq the model, but I highly recommend a post that he's had in the last couple of days, I think it was from last Wednesday, where he's gone to a different neighborhood that is beset by these Al-Qaeda terrorists. And it gives you a very clear idea of what the situation is. There are a few of these, hothead bad guys who are determined to kill a bunch of Shiites and basically provoke a civil war. And everybody is scared. Basically, what should happen is the community should rise up and kill them. They've lived at peace with Shiites for years. They don't want to have this sectarian war, and everybody is scared to do that because anybody who says, well, let's have peace with the Shiites, they say, well, we're going to behead you. And they're terrified. So it's like the man who shot Liberty Valance. There are a few bad guys terrorizing the town, and somebody needs to come in and kill them. That's sort of the situation, and you're not going to stop. You don't stop that by killing Zarqawi because it is a cellular structure, and the reason they're scared of killing him is because the buddies in the cell in the next neighborhood will come and kill you. So it's a cellular structure that works for Al Qaeda.
Well, first of all, are all these guys Al-Qaeda and Iraq guys, or are some of them just like Ba'athis and...
Well, he implies that they've merged. that basically their Ba'athist, it's run by the son of one of Saddam Hussein's officials. So it's run by an ex-Ba'athist. He's the lead bad guy in their neighborhood. But they are loosely affiliated with Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
But it's basically the same thing. They just want to create havoc, create a sectarian civil war, and destroy the American
And do they kind of like
government.
succeed in doing it in one neighborhood and then move on more or less? I mean,
No, they're entrenched.
they
in
never
the
succeed. I mean, that's an important question. I mean, has the sectarian warfare truly acquired a momentum of its own in lots of neighborhoods, or is it always at its base? Would you find kind of outsider agitators?
In this neighborhood, it had not succeeded in acquiring a momentum of its own. The chieftains would like to stop it. The 95%, 99% of the people would like to stop it, but they're all scared of taking on these beheaders because they're just more vicious than they are. And it raises the issue of if this global war on terror is so important, and if Iraq is the key to it, why doesn't Bush commit the troops necessary to do the job?
I was thinking about that when I read a piece somewhere. I'll find it and link to it. About a place where they were doing kind of the oil spot strategy. In other words, they had secluded this little area, and there were American troops there.
Right.
And they had somewhat pacified it. It was a better place to live than it had been. And, if our strategy... I mean, it's one thing. There are people who say, look, the American troops generate more hatred than they tamp down or whatever, and so get them all out. Fine, but our strategy is premised on the idea that that's actually not true. That this oil spot strategy can work. That you can send these American troops into these confined areas and make things better, and then expand the areas.
Right.
And this one article, either in the Post or the Times, seemed to confirm that on a kind of anecdotal basis. And while I was reading that, I just thought, well, if this is our only hope, according to the Bush administration, I mean, how can the administration claim that we don't need more troops to do this in more places?
It can't, and actually, if you look at the numbers, they have increased the troops fairly substantially, quietly. I think they're 10 or 15,000. I heard on TV more than there were a few months ago. So
that was quiet. I didn't hear it.
They're doing what they're not doubling it, but there's an incremental increase. It's also interesting that Sistani sent an emissary to the United States saying, "Please don't withdraw." You would think he would have a fairly good idea of whether the American troops were creating more friction and more bloodshed than they're stopping, and he seems to feel that they're a useful
Although
presence.
he has a kind of more local issue he's probably preoccupied with, which is Muqtada al-Sadr, the more radical Shiite, is fighting him for the soul of the Shiites, right?
That could be.
And Sadr has been really acting up. I mean, he had his troops, his militia had a battle with the Iraqi army, and I guess got the better of it.
Although, if you read Juan Cole, it seems to have been mainly it was a Shiite Iraqi army versus Muqtada al-Sadr, and it's basically, one side kills two people from the other side, and they get really pissed off, and they strike back, and it didn't seem all that earth-shakingly important. If you read
I don't
Juan Cole.
know, but the fact that dynamic exists among Shia, the fact that it's reached violent proportions, is a little disturbing. And he's a hard guy to rein in, partly because the prime minister owes his prime ministership to al-Sadr.
Right.
Al-Sadr gave him the votes in Parliament that pushed Maliki over the edge to win the prime ministership.
But clearly Sistani is our horse in that fight, so if he says he wants us to stay, that's a good argument for staying. Even Tom Ricks, who wrote a book about how we screwed up the invasion every possible way, thinks we should stay. And the final argument is, suppose we left and there's a genocidal civil war, then there'll be international calls to intervene the way there are international calls to intervene in Darfur. Well, we're already there. Okay, let's stop that from happening.
Well, you might argue that it would be better if they weren't American troops, but I'm not making that argument.
In Somalia, they're American.
I think you would only leave if you thought the situation was so far out of control that there was no conceivable way to impose order after you left anyway. I mean,
right.
But I heard John McCain a couple weeks ago saying, "Here's what we need to do in Iraq. First of all, we've got to," I think he said, either take out or take on or something, Muqtada al-Sadr. So he sees him as a really formidable force, and I think he was talking about do it in a military fashion, and I thought, geez, things are pretty bad. If we're talking about fighting a two-front war now, where on the one hand we're fighting the Sunni insurgents, on the other hand we're fighting a very powerful Shiite militia. I mean, that seems to me a pretty grim scenario. And the interviewer, it was on Meet the Press, but it wasn't Russert, it was a sub, kind of failed to follow up and ask him, how exactly would you do this? But
Well, except that, Sadr is one of the people exacerbating sectarianism from the Shiite side, so in that sense, it's even-handed. We're going after the people who are killing Shiites, and we're going after the people who are responding by killing Sunnis.
No, it is, but it's still a two-front war, and we were having enough trouble with one front.
But we've called on militias to disarm. He's obviously not going to give up his arms, without any combination of incentive and threat of force. So somebody's going to have to go after him, even if he's part of the government.
Somebody is somehow with weapons or without. I don't know. Now this Pentagon report.
There is this other Shiite faction, the Badr Brigade, that fights with him every now and then. So maybe they'll go after him. But anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's like Iran, though, right? I'm not sure the Bush administration is in the mood to team up with Iran right now.
Okay.
Or is it? Wait, I get them mixed up. I mean, it's this Badr-Sadr phonetic problem.
But what was the point you were about to make? Sorry.
I was just about to move to this. Yeah, I think I may have that mixed up. Anyway, I was about to move to this report, this Pentagon report.
That seems to be old news. It's the Pentagon's required to submit this thing, but it doesn't reflect these recent developments that you talked about.
Well, that was what I assumed was driving right-wing bloggers everywhere nuts. And I was going to ask you to tell me whether that was the case. I read all these newspaper accounts of this Pentagon report saying that in the 3 months ending in early August, things had gotten worse. But, elsewhere you could find everyone saying, actually, but August itself has been an unusually subdued month in terms of violence. And these newspaper accounts tended not to point that out. So I assume that was a big complaint on the right?
I assume so, too. I mean, I actually haven't been reading the right enough to know, but that seems like the obvious point is that even, the pessimistic script has so much momentum that bureaucratically that even when things seem to change, the Pentagon files a report on the first few months of the year that again looks pessimistic. But the Pentagon knows this, so if they wrote a highly pessimistic report, it reflects something, some sort of ass covering.
The numbers were unequivocal for the period they covered.
But the Pentagon could have chosen, I think, to spun it more optimistically than they did. They could have said the first 6 months was awful, but hey, things are looking up now, and they didn't do that. And it may be a sense that they're, a troubling sense that they're protecting themselves in case things go very wrong. And maybe, I'm sure there are a lot of people in the Army who really dislike, in the Pentagon, who really dislike what's happening in Iraq.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
It was bizarre to me that they didn't even try to spin it more optimistically, because the press is going to pick out the most pessimistic thing, so, why not?
Well, which happened?
It may just be bureaucracy, but it has to go to the printer, so by the time it gets printed up, the good news that happened in the last 2 weeks, isn't in the report. But that's not really a complete excuse.
Yeah. And in any event, I mean, toward the end of August, things heated up again, and I don't know where they stand now, but the violence did return to pre-August levels, at least for a while.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, I write that maybe there's some good news for Iraq, and then there's an attack, and I get all these emails saying, "Well, what do you think now?" Well, both the good news and the bad news is sort of temporary, and you got to look at a much longer picture.
Yeah, I mean, one reason we haven't been talking about Iraq, aside from the Lebanon distraction, is really just that increasingly my sense is just things got to this level of kind of pretty bad and have been staying there, and it seems almost hopeless to try to read the tea leaves.
Yeah. Well, the latest thing is not they're talking about is not the sectarian violence; it's the order from the head of Kurdistan not to fly the Iraqi flag.
I missed that. I mean, there has been a lot of Kurdistan stuff in the news and commentary.
Which is, I mean, it seems to me it's a really inopportune time for them to talk, to basically do something that's sort of setting the stage for partition. But
that seems to be where it's headed. The other thing is a lot of Arabs, I guess mainly Sunnis, have been entering Kurdistan for kind of refuge.
Huh, I didn't realize
The
that.
Kurds are ambivalent about this. I can link to that.
I think isn't the general CW that Barzani, who's the guy who didn't want to fly the Iraqi flag, is the short-sighted Kurd panderer, and Talabani, who's the president of the whole country, is the far-sighted leader who wants to transcend ethnic differences?
We have another phonetic problem there that would hopelessly impede any attempt on my part to understand the situation. But I think you're better versed than I am in Kurdistan at the moment.
But I really highly recommend this Iraq the Model post. It gives a very clear idea of what's going on the ground.
We will link.
And he's not necessarily optimistic. I mean, he has no solution.
Well, we have something in common then, he and I.
But it seems clear what the solution is.
Which is?
Had the Iraqi government or the U.S. should go in and kill the bad guys. And the people will...
You know, it's amazing nobody thought of that, Mickey.
And the people will welcome them with, roses and sweets.
Well, clearly, I mean, you're half serious, right?
I'm pretty serious.
But clearly there's something about the situation on the ground that makes it, as a practical matter, difficult to go in and kill these. I mean, you know, in a way, this just tells us that we have a situation where there is not, order. I mean, authority is broken down. And this is what happens when authority breaks down in a country, and it's not easy to build it back up. And there you get back to the fact that from the beginning, Bush had no plan for preserving order.
Well, but now he does have a plan, which is to go neighborhood by neighborhood. He just may not have enough troops to do the job. But that's obviously how it would have to be done, right?
Yeah, but it's very hard to do it deftly with Americans who don't speak the language, don't know the neighborhood, without killing civilians and so on. And manifestly, the Iraqis, in many cases, seem not yet ready for the job.
Well, right. The Iraqis are often the enemy. The Iraqis are often, police by day, death squads by night.
Yeah.
So it's not at all clear that the Americans aren't better than the Iraqi police as opposed to the Iraqi army.
Maybe, but there's real downsides to using them. And in any event, I'm pretty sure that the kill the bad guys strategy has been bandied about in the White House. So they must see...
Well, but this is go read this, buddy. It's a very clear... I don't ordinarily think kill the bad guys is the solution to everything.
No, I remember reading a piece like 3 months ago that described the situation very much as you're describing it.
It's like they're
like the neighbors are people of goodwill who are pro-integration.
And there are 12 Al Qaeda hotheads in the neighborhood who everybody is scared to get rid of.
Right.
Yeah,
but I do think sometimes they succeed in making it a deeper war. When once you've had a relative killed by somebody from a different sect, your attitude changes.
Right. That's right. But this is 5 days old and it hadn't happened yet. That's my only point.
Okay. So there's this Armitage thing, right?
It's very odd. I mean, basically everybody's known that Armitage, sort of suspected that Armitage was, the big leaker of Plame's, of Valerie Plame's name, the wife of this Foreign Service official who questioned, Bush's claims about Iraq going after uranium in Niger. Who was publicly revealed as a CIA agent. Was this the product of a Bush administration conspiracy to punish her, or was it something else? Armitage is a State Department official. He's not part of the Bush conspiracy. David Corn and Mike Lesagoff reveal in their book that, yes, he was
their book
the leaker.
Hubris.
Their book Hubris. He was the leaker to Novak. So the right wing pounces on this and says, well, see, there was nothing to the Plame scandal at all. It was all a ridiculous waste of time. They should release Scooter Libby and forget the whole thing. The left, including Issakoff and Corn, saying, wait, not so fast. This doesn't destroy the whole scandal. First, it shouldn't excuse Scooter Libby, who's not accused of leaking her name, but of lying to the prosecutor. So even if the underlying crime doesn't exist, you're not supposed to lie about it to a prosecutor. So he should clearly still go to trial.
Right.
And B, they argue, well, even if Armitage was, even if Armitage was the leaker to Novak, independent of that, and the first leaker, independent of that, the White House really did have a campaign to point out to reporters that Joe Wilson's wife worked for the CIA, and doesn't this wasn't his trip to Niger a nepotistic boondoggle that the press should ignore?
Yeah.
And Korn is constrained on his blog because the book is coming out, and he promises big things when it comes out. He says they're going to plow new waters or chart new waters. So maybe he really has something that hasn't come out yet that would make it clear that the Armitage revelation does not, remove whatever scandal quotient there is in the plain thing.
And I hope he said chart new waters and not plow them.
I think he said chart.
If he said plow them, I'm concerned about the literary quality of the book.
I think that was my fatigue. That was my fatigue. He said chart.
Yeah. Now, one, there is this argument on the right that Patrick Fitzgerald, the special prosecutor, was out of line because it turns out he knew early on that Armitage was the guy, and yet he went on and investigated fully. But it seems to me that there are actually two responses to that. One of them you alluded to, which is that, well, there were these other guys in the administration who were kind of part of Neocon Central, and who seemed to have been doing something more like an orchestrated campaign to get the word out. And so that was a little more, something worth looking into. It's a good thing that he looked into it. But there's a second point that was actually, you directed me to this post on this Tigerhawk blog.
Right.
He makes a point, and I think I may be using it in a different way than he did, but he makes the point that, everyone is now thinking, well, Armitage, Powell, the State Department was anti-Iraq war, and then there were the pro-war guys like Cheney, Libby.
Right.
Well, it's actually not that simple. I mean, first of all, Colin Powell wasn't against the war. Colin Powell was for the war. I mean, he may have had more reservations than most. Similarly, Richard Haas, who's now sounding very dovish and was in Powell's office, I'm not aware of him having been on record against the war, and I'm not aware of Armitage having been on record against the war, and that's a point that Tigerhawk makes.
Well, Tigerhawk says that Armitage was even more pro-war than Powell.
Right, and so that further legitimizes Fitzgerald's continued inquiry into the thing. It's entirely possible that Armitage himself could have been part of an administration campaign to get the word out. In fact, I'm not convinced he wasn't.
That's pretty far-fetched, Bob.
I don't think so.
In fact, Tom McGuire makes fun of this possibility.
No, but it could be the case, and I think one of these blogs said this, that Armitage caught wind of the administration's desire to get the word out, and Armitage, who wanted to endear himself with the Hawks in the administration because he knew his status was kind of uncertain with them, and so he participated in the plot. He didn't get written orders, but he did it.
You don't need a plot, Bob. This guy comes out with this ridiculously inflated claim that I disproved the uranium Niger tie. Nobody knows that his wife put him up for the trip. Your instinctive reaction is to tell every reporter in sight, hey, there's this great gossip bit. His wife put him up for the trip. He's not such a big deal. And you don't need a coordinated conspiracy to do that. And it still might violate the law, which is why, I agree that it's perfectly okay for Fitzgerald to look into it.
What you just said is a plausible scenario. But if you're the special prosecutor, you're not supposed to stop just because somebody points out a benign and plausible scenario. You're supposed to leave no stone unturned. And I'm saying it was also plausible to a special prosecutor with an open mind that Armitage was part of something larger, did do it intentionally, and so he should have kept looking into it to see who else was involved.
Well, fair enough, and he ultimately didn't bring charges, so he did look into it.
He did, and I'm just saying he was entitled, and the right is trying to act like he was out of control, and blah, blah, blah. By the way, speaking of Wilson's wife, Valerie Plame, David Korn has an item today. Today's revelation from their book is that she herself, her job at the CIA, was to look into Iraq's weapons of mass destruction during the run-up to the war.
Iraq or Iran?
No, Iraq, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If I got it right, I just glanced at it before we went on.
And why is that?
And
why is that a big scoop?
Well, it's just interesting. I mean, I forget what kind of use David puts it to. The use he puts it to is, okay, she was, first of all, technically covert. She made trips and so on. So it was not the kind of person whose identity you're supposed to reveal. I think that was what he said. To me, it's just interesting that she was sending. Well, anyway, she knew the territory.
But everybody knew she worked on weapons of mass destruction. So who else would we care about?
Well, no, but she was head of some office that I think was the CIA's office for figuring out the Iraq WMD situation. Maybe I've got it wrong. Anyway, we'll link him. The other thing about David, of course, is that as you linked to this, but in last week he was on Blogging Heads with Byron York, and Byron, conservative, and has been one of his detractors on this particular issue, and we came as close to open hostility on Blogging Heads TV as we had come since the last time you and I spoke, I guess. I mean, it was got a little testy.
It was great TV.
What's that?
It was great TV.
It's great TV, and we will link to it. They are, but as you said, David was constrained about what he could say about the book in reply to Byron's criticisms of his journalistic technique.
Right.
And so they are going to come back on probably next week.
Yeah,
but we'll certainly keep people...
I look forward to this new water that he's going to plow.
Yeah, the whole world does. HBO wanted rights to this thing. They wanted to do a pay-per-view. But I said, no, that's not the way we do business here. Information wants to be free.
That's very idealistic of you. Korn and Isikoff are responsible journalists. I mean, they wouldn't have... they followed the story where it led them, and it led them to Armitage, which didn't help their anti-Bush case.
No,
but they printed it out. So I would give great weight to whatever they say. But we haven't heard what they have to say yet.
Right, and in terms of Isikoff's nonpartisan credentials, remember what made him famous.
Well, but you
he broke the Monica Lewinsky story, which did not exactly help Bill Clinton.
But you could make the argument that this is his make-up call. He's getting back in good with the left after trashing their president. So
this Armitage story wasn't the way to start off that campaign. I'll say that.
That cuts both ways. But I know Isikoff, and he is a journalist, meaning he will go after the truth. So. If he says something, I don't think it's motivated by horrible, partisan overriding bias. He's just going for the scoop.
Okay.
So, but we don't know whether he has anything. So, only time will tell.
We don't know what he has, but we look forward to ongoing revelations from the book Hubris. Now, quickly, last week, I was pushing this tactical restraint meme, the idea that in the war on terror, sometimes even when you're provoked and have a right to retaliate is not the smart thing to do.
Yes.
And I said, you could use Zidane, the soccer player, the headbutting soccer player, as a metaphor for this, and do like an anti-Bush TV ad.
Right.
And sure enough, a viewer actually did this. A viewer who says he had never done this before. His name is Cody K. And he sent in this video. It was the first time he had used Apple's movie software. I think it's iMovie or something, their editing software. And I wanted to talk about it a little. Before we do, I want to say that if, as I hope, viewer-generated content becomes a bigger thing on Blogging Heads TV,
right,
the record will always show that Cody K gave us our first contribution. And if we ever have awards for the best Blogging Heads viewer-generated content, I think we should call them the Codys.
That sounds good.
Emmys, Tonys, Codys.
I think it's a fitting tribute.
Okay, thanks. Anyway, now on to the ad that he generated. I think it's deeply flawed, but I think it's...
Can we see it?
What's that?
Can we see it?
We can see it. First let me say it's flawed because of the way I laid it out. He did what I suggested, and the flaw was in my conception of it, not in the execution. So now, I think we can see it. I think I can stitch it in here. And you have seen it?
I took a quick glance at it. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't see what was wrong with it.
Okay, let's take a look at it here.
There are some who feel like that the conditions are such that they can attack us there. My answer is bring them on.
Well, you have no criticism? I only have a criticism of the way I laid it out.
I thought it was much more effective than I expected, given my doubts as to your future as a political consultant. But I thought the Zidane thing actually made the point. But go ahead.
It does make the point. Here's the problem: is when I conceived of the Zidane thing, it was in the context of Israel's reaction to the Hezbollah provocation, which was justified, but I thought not in Israel's strategic interest. So that was a classic example of having the moral right to retaliate, and yet retaliation not being a smart thing. Now, in this ad, and this is the way I talked about it, it's actually applied to Bush's war on terror. And I think the point of tactical restraint does apply to Bush's war on terror. The problem is it doesn't apply straightforwardly. Like with Iraq, it isn't the case that Iraq provoked us and we shouldn't have invaded. They didn't provoke us. The problem is they didn't do 9/11. So using the Iraq
provoked
war,
us. They were shooting at our planes every other day.
Yeah, but nobody's thinking of it that way. I mean, that's not the fundamental problem with Iraq as retaliate. Nobody thinks of Iraq as having been a retaliation. They think of it as having been premised on a suspicion that was not borne out. And so it's not a good example. And that's my and come to think of it, it's hard to link it up to Bush's failure to exercise tactical restraint in a really clear, vivid manner. I mean, maybe if viewers agree with me that this is kind of a problem with it, maybe they'll have ideas as to how to change it, and we can refine it. But go ahead.
Maybe that's why I liked it better than you did, because I thought it does apply to Iraq. I mean, we had every reason to be pissed off at Iraq. They'd invaded a neighboring country. We'd beaten them in the war, and then now they were welching on the agreement that ended the war while maintaining this annoying strategic ambiguity about whether they had WMDs. And shooting at our planes in the no-fly zone. And, President Clinton, among others, said, we have every right to invade under existing UN resolutions. The question is, was it prudent to invade? And it seems to me that by far the most powerful argument is that it was just imprudent, and we should have exercised
Well, it was certainly imprudent.
restraint.
I'm not as clear that we had the right because they let the inspectors in. But anyway, I mean, let's let viewers, A, tell us whether they think it works, B, if they don't, what you might do to improve it, assuming they're with me in the spirit of the argument. The other thing I'd say is I actually think the end is pretty effective. Just, whatever it is, let's put some grown-ups in charge of foreign policy, coming after any number of kind of inane things Bush has said. And one reason it's effective is because it kind of pluralizes it. Let's put grown-ups in charge makes this something that could help congressional candidates, right? I mean, even though Bush is not running for re-election this year, just the idea that, it's a way of associating the Republicans more broadly with Bush and suggesting that we put somebody more mature in charge, right?
I disagree. I think the calling Bush not a grown-up is seems the same old liberal condescension. He's a moron. He's not a grown-up. It's going to turn off voters. It should be something like, let's keep our heads. And that ties in neatly with Zidane's headbutt.
Let's keep our heads.
And so if I were a political consultant, I would change the tagline. I don't like that tagline.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was reacting to that part from my ideological standpoint, thinking, Bush is like a little kid, and let's give it to grown-up. You're right. Maybe swing voters it wouldn't work with. I think you were reacting to the earlier part from your perspective, which is the assumption that, yes, the invasion was fully justified. I don't share that assumption. But
I think most voters are perfectly willing to have that assumption pandered to. I mean, it's much easier to say, yes, we were justified, but it was imprudent, than to say, to question whether it was justified or not. People don't want to hear that it was unjustified.
Well, anyway, viewers can send in suggestions for refinement, comments, or their own versions if they are sufficiently ambitious. But whatever, the Cody K will forever be the first.
I thought Cody did better than you did. I thought he did a fine job.
Thanks, Mickey. I thought he did a fine job. I mean, I saw no flaws with what he did. To the extent that there were problems, I thought it was in the way I originally laid it out. But it is, my view of our failure to exercise tactical restraint is kind of a complicated thing to convey, because I think we've been through this. Forget it.
It's very complicated, and I have to go read Fallows' piece to fight. But it seems to me your conception of tactical restraint is we have to take a few more hits of airplanes being shot down and buildings being blown up, and not react by overreacting. And we just have to go with the flow and lose a few thousand people here and a few thousand people there. And that seems to me a sort of an insane political lift.
It may be hard politically, but if so, that will be because people... I mean, my argument is, if it's hard politically, that's because people don't understand the logic of the strategy of this war on terror. And so I'm looking for ways to vividly convey the argument. And you're right. It's not as straightforward as the mistake I think Israel made.
But it's premised on the idea that profiling and stopping liquids from going on planes is such a horrible thing. It's going to generate so much terrorism.
The liquids thing
that
is
it's
pretty
not
marginal.
worth it. And I just think the coefficients are the other way. I think if we can stop 9/11 by profiling, we should stop 9/11. That'll produce less terrorism in the long run.
Yeah, well, that's an argument we had earlier. Anyway, I think it's cool that video is showing up without you or me having to do any work. What a wonderful world that would be. Finally, Mickey, this Lee Siegel thing.
Yeah, everybody's talking about this Lee Siegel thing,
Okay,
so we should get that in.
Guy at the New Republic, he started blogging. Like all bloggers, he had detractors. They said nasty things in the comments section. Suddenly some guy with the name Sprezzatura or something, which is an Italian word, started showing up really dissing his detractors, and then it turned out that Sprezzatura was either him or somebody writing under his direction or something like that. Anyway, the New Republic has been a little vague, but clearly he was implicated in the generation of these emails and was pretending they were from somebody other than him, and he has been suspended.
Yeah, I don't like Lee Siegel. He's a horrible, pretentious Leon Wieseltier wannabe. But this really seems like a misdemeanor. I mean, in the comment section of the web, everybody sort of goes under an assumed name. And so what if one of the guys is the author? It's called sock puppetry, and I just don't think it's a firing offense. But a guy at the LA Times got fired for a similar thing, and he went a step further than Lee Siegel. He not only wrote comments under an assumed name, but then in his real thing under his own name, he would refer to those comments as if, saying, see, even so-and-so supports me, as if it was another person. So that's a level of falsity.
Mickey, I think
this is a firing offense.
Mickey, this is completely a firing offense. At an august magazine like the New Republic, when you've got a journalist intentionally misleading his readers, you've got to fire the guy.
He's not misleading Sprezzatura. Do they think somebody actually called Sprezzatura?
Mickey, he denied. I'm pretty sure that when somebody went on and said, "Hey, I think you're Lee Siegel," and Sprezzatura denied it.
Oh, that is different.
Yeah, I don't think it even matters. But the funny thing is that in terms of what's actually going to damage him personally, more damaging than the fact of this deception is the content of the. Have you been to Brad DeLong's site and seen that list of what the emails he wrote actually said?
No, but nothing could be more embarrassing than his core writings.
Mickey, I encourage you to reserve judgment. I mean, this is pure id, the reptilian core of the man's brain on paper.
No, that is...
it's embarrassing.
The reptilian core is never far from the surface in his writing. I'm told he's written some brilliant things, so...
He may have.
I just haven't read them.
Look, people have always wondered what was he kind of doing there, because so much of his writing was not bad per se, but just kind of embarrassing in one sense or another. And... I don't know, but criminologists are, of course, wondering how Leon Wieseltier will handle this, right? Because he's a Leon guy. He's a Leon hire, right?
I guess, but he still writes for Slate, don't forget.
Well, interesting question. What will Slate do?
I don't know.
But also, what will Leon... I mean, right now he's been suspended at the New Republic, and the question is, will Leon, go to bat for him or cut him loose?
It could be more complicated than that. We don't... That's what you would expect would be happening, but maybe... You never know. It's so complicated. It's like faculty politics.
Well, it's changed since we were there, too, because now there's like a triumvirate of owners or something.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going on. But I will say this, Mickey, in TV journalism, there's a history of having like kind of a signature sign-off line, like Walter Cronkite, it was, that's the way it is, and Edward R. Murrow is good night and good luck. Right. And I just found this line in one of those emails that Lee Siegel covertly wrote, and I was, it was aimed at his detractors.
Right.
And we have detractors. I was thinking this might become our signature sign-off line. See what you think.
Okay.
Take that, you bunch of immature, abusive sheep. What do you think?
That's pretty good.
We could just say that every night.
That is pretty good.
We could say, see you, Mickey, see you, Bob, and then we both say together, take that, you bunch of immature, abusive sheep.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Let's sleep on it.
It's a little bit of a mouthful, but the sentiment is right.
Yeah.
Anyway, live like Lee Siegel. He's my role model.
Okay. Well, let's not do that sign off today, but let's think about it. Okay. Right now, let's just say goodbye. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
See you, Bob.
See you around.